Picture this. You're sitting in a coffee shop, surrounded by 30, maybe 40 people. Someone is laughing at a table near the window. Someone else is typing furiously on their laptop. The barista calls out a name. Soft music plays in the background. Life is happening all around you. And yet, you feel completely alone. Not lonely in the dramatic sense. Not weeping into your cup. Just untouched. Like you're watching the world through a pane of glass so clean you almost can't tell it's there. Now here's what makes this strange. You are not unusual. You are not broken. In fact, that quiet ache you just recognized, that invisible distance between yourself and the world, is one of the most common experiences of our time. It cuts across countries, ages, income levels, and lifestyles. It visits people with thousands of followers online and people who barely use social media at all. It knocks on the door of the married and the single, the extroverted and the introverted, the successful and the struggling. We live in the most connected era in human history. And somehow, we have never felt more alone. This video is about why. Not in the way you've heard before, not with platitudes about putting your phone down or spending more time outside. This is about something deeper. Something structural. Something that was quietly built into the architecture of modern life long before any of us thought to question it. Because if we want to understand the disconnection we feel, we first have to understand what we were designed for. Let's start with a number that should, by every reasonable measure, feel like a triumph. 5 billion. That's roughly how many people are active on social media today. 5 billion human beings who can reach each other across continents in seconds. Who can watch a protest unfold in real time on the other side of the planet. Who can video call their grandmother, join a community of strangers who share their rarest interests, and send a message to someone they haven't seen in 20 years. All before finishing their morning coffee. By the metrics we've always used to measure connection, access, reach, frequency of contact, we are living inside a miracle. A few generations ago, if you moved to a new city, you might genuinely lose touch with your entire former life. Letters took days. Long-distance calls were expensive. People disappeared. Now no one disappears. The whole world fits in your pocket. And yet, in 2023, the United States Surgeon General issued an official advisory, not about smoking, not about obesity, not about a pandemic virus, but about loneliness. He called it an epidemic. He cited research showing that roughly half of American adults reported measurable loneliness, and that the health consequences were comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The United Kingdom had already appointed a minister for loneliness years earlier, acknowledging that something was quietly devastating their population that no policy on housing or employment had managed to address. This is the paradox at the heart of modern life. More connection, more isolation. More contact, less intimacy. More people in our feeds, fewer in our lives. And the most disorienting part? We often can't name what we're missing. We know something isn't there, but we struggle to say what it is. To understand that, we have to go back. Much further back than the internet, further back than the Industrial Revolution, all the way to the creature we actually are, For the vast majority of human existence, roughly 95% of our time as a species, we lived in small groups. Hunter-gatherer bands of between 20 and 150 people. You knew everyone. You cooked with the same people you hunted with. You grieved with the same people you celebrated with. Your life and the lives of others were genuinely, practically interwoven. In this world, belonging wasn't a lifestyle choice or a wellness goal. It was survival. If you were excluded from the group, you died. There were no solo apartments in the savannah. No food delivery apps on the African plains. Social rejection and death were essentially the same thing, and evolution remembered that. This is why loneliness hurts. Physically hurts, in ways that brain imaging studies now confirm activate the same neural circuits as physical pain. Your brain is not being dramatic. It is doing exactly what it was shaped to do, treating the threat of social exclusion as an emergency signal, the same way it treats hunger or injury. Your ancestors who responded urgently to loneliness survived long enough to become your ancestors. The ones who shrugged it off did not. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar spent decades studying social group sizes across primate species and came to a fascinating conclusion. The human neocortex, the part of our brain associated with complex thought, appears to be sized precisely to manage a social network of roughly 150 people. We call this Dunbar's number. 150 is approximately the group size at which humans can maintain stable, trust-based relationships without needing formal structures like laws and hierarchies to hold things together. Beyond that number, things start to fracture. Think about what that means. The communities we evolved for weren't just about proximity. They were about depth. About knowing someone well enough to predict how they'd behave in a crisis. About being known well enough that your reputation preceded your words. About the kind of trust that only accumulates through time and shared experience and genuine vulnerability. The psychologist John Cacioppo, who spent his career studying loneliness, made a distinction that cuts right to the heart of this. He found that what matters for human well-being isn't the number of social contacts you have, it's the quality of those contacts. Specifically, whether they involve what he called felt security. The sense that someone genuinely sees you, would notice your absence, and cares what happens to you. That feeling, being genuinely seen and known, is what human beings are built to need. Not just as a preference, but as a biological requirement, as fundamental as food and sleep. And now look at the world we actually live in. The shift began long before the internet. It began with cities. Urbanization pulled human beings out of the small, stable communities they had occupied for millennia and concentrated them in enormous, anonymous environments where proximity replaced familiarity. In a village, everyone knew your name. In a city, no one needed to. You could live in an apartment building for 10 years and never learn the name of the person directly below you. This wasn't malice. It was the natural consequence of scale. Then came the automobile, which didn't just change how people traveled, it restructured where people lived. Suburbs were designed around the car, not the community. There was no market square. No natural gathering place. Just houses, lawns, driveways, and roads connecting one private space to another. The architecture of daily life stopped requiring you to encounter your neighbors. Then came television, which made the home not just a place to sleep, but the primary site of entertainment. Instead of gathering at the pub, the town hall, or the park, families gathered around a screen. Then every family member got their own screen. Then came social media. And everything accelerated. But here's something that rarely gets discussed. Alongside all of these technological changes, something subtler was happening in the culture itself. Individualism, the idea that the self is the fundamental unit of life, that personal achievement and personal fulfillment are the primary goals, was quietly rising to become the dominant value system of Western society. Now, individualism has genuine virtues. It drove civil rights movements. It protected people from the suffocating conformity of traditional communities. It gave people the freedom to define their own lives. These aren't nothing. But individualism also quietly eroded the very structures that had historically made community possible. Civic organizations declined. Churches emptied, not just because of theology, but because of schedule. People stopped joining things: bowling leagues, town committees, local clubs. Robert Putnam documented this collapse in his landmark book Bowling Alone, showing that social participation in America had been falling steadily since the 1960s, long before Facebook existed. We built a world optimized for individual freedom and private comfort. And we discovered, slowly and painfully, that it comes at a cost we didn't put on the invoice. There's a small moment that captures something important about our time. It happened to a woman named Sarah, a graphic designer in her early 30s, living alone in Chicago. Sarah had a week where she didn't need to leave her apartment once. Her groceries arrived via an app. Her meals came in insulated bags. Her entertainment was on demand. Her work was remote. Her social life was a series of group chats. At the end of that week, she told a friend that she felt vaguely wrong, physically uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite explain. Her friend asked when she'd last had a real conversation with someone in person. Sarah had to think for a moment. It had been 8 days. She hadn't noticed. That's the thing. The convenience had been so seamless, so pleasant, so frictionless, that the absence hadn't announced itself. It had just accumulated. This is what economists call an externality, a cost that doesn't show up in the original transaction. When you order groceries through an app, you get your food. What you don't get is the 5-minute conversation with the checkout clerk who recognized you and asked about your sister. What you don't get is the moment of accidental eye contact with a stranger, the spontaneous interaction that reminds you, on some level below language, that you are part of a human world. These micro-interactions are not trivial. Researchers have found that brief, positive exchanges with weak social ties, the cashier, the barista, the neighbor you wave to, meaningfully contribute to daily well-being. They aren't substitutes for deep connection, but they are part of the social texture of daily life. They are the background hum of belonging. And when that hum disappears, something goes quiet inside us that we struggle to identify. Streaming services optimized for binge watching have dramatically reduced the experience of watching things together, in real time, with others. The communal ritual of the weekly television episode, where people gathered or talked the next morning because everyone had seen the same thing, was replaced by individual, on-demand consumption. You watch alone. You might even prefer it. But preference and need are different things. Food delivery apps and remote work have reduced the frequency with which many people have reasons to leave their homes at all. And the less you leave, the harder it becomes to start. The social muscles atrophy. Interaction starts to feel effortful. People begin to feel anxious in social situations they once navigated easily. Not because they've become antisocial, but because, like all muscles, the capacity for natural social ease requires practice to maintain. Convenience has given us something remarkable. And it has quietly, with no malicious intent, begun to dissolve the friction that made us human. Here is a distinction that took researchers years to articulate clearly, but once you hear it, you won't be able to unhear it. There is a difference between attention and connection. Attention is when someone notices you. Connection is when someone knows you. Attention can be given by thousands of strangers in 30 seconds. Connection requires time, vulnerability, and mutual investment that can't be scaled or rushed. Social media is extraordinarily good at delivering attention. A post that performs well can bring you hundreds of signals that people have seen you, reacted to you, engaged with your existence. For a moment, this feels significant. The brain releases dopamine, the same neurochemical involved in anticipation and reward, and for a brief window, the hunger quiets. But then it returns. Because what the brain actually wanted wasn't alike. It wanted to be known. There's a phenomenon that some researchers have started calling the Instagram paradox. The more time people spend on image-sharing platforms, the lonelier they tend to report feeling, even though they are technically spending time engaging with other people's lives. The reason, it seems, is that social media presents curated, highlight reel versions of other people's experiences. When you scroll through them, you are not seeing the full, messy, ordinary reality of other human lives. You are seeing the version people chose to perform. And comparing your unedited inner life to someone else's edited outer life is a comparison you are always going to lose. The psychologist Sherry Tuckle, who has studied the relationship between technology and the self for decades, makes a point that cuts precisely here. She says that we are increasingly tempted by what she calls the Goldilocks effect of digital communication. We want connection just close enough to feel warm, but not so close that it demands too much. A text is manageable. A phone call is more demanding. A real conversation, where you must be present and responsive in real time, with all the mess and unpredictability that involves, is the most demanding of all. And so we retreat, by small increments, toward the safer, more controllable simulation of connection. We are always reachable, but rarely truly reached. We perform ourselves for audiences instead of revealing ourselves to people. And in the gap between performance and revelation, loneliness quietly pools. In 1945, a psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl emerged from the Nazi concentration camps and wrote one of the most influential books of the 20th century. His central argument was this: human beings can survive almost any suffering if they have a sense of meaning. What breaks people is not pain, but purposelessness. Not hardship, but emptiness. The data suggests that modern disconnection is producing exactly that emptiness, at scale. Rates of depression, anxiety, and what psychologists call social anhedonia, the loss of pleasure in social situations, have risen sharply across the developed world over the past several decades, and particularly among young people who have grown up in the most digitally connected generation in history. This is not coincidence. Loneliness, the research shows, doesn't just feel bad. It fundamentally alters how the mind works. Chronically lonely people show heightened vigilance towards social threats. They become more likely to interpret neutral expressions as hostile, more likely to expect rejection, more likely to withdraw from situations that might otherwise build the very connections they need. Loneliness creates the conditions for more loneliness. It is self-reinforcing in ways that make it genuinely difficult to escape without intervention. And then there is the phenomenon that might be the most distinctly modern form of human suffering: the experience of being surrounded by people and feeling completely alone. Not isolated in a cabin in the woods. Not literally friendless. Just present in rooms, at parties, in offices, in families, and utterly untouched. Like a radio signal that can't quite find the right frequency. This happens in part because modern social environments often demand a particular kind of performance. We are expected to be fine, to be interesting, to project wellness and capability and curated positivity. The workplace, especially, has become a space where authenticity is tolerated only in extremely narrow bands. You can talk about your weekend. You cannot talk about your grief. You can mention you're tired. You cannot say you haven't felt like yourself in months. And so people smile and perform, and navigate their days without ever being truly met. And then they go home and feel the weight of all the things they didn't say to anyone. The philosopher Albert Camus wrote about the absurd, the gap between the human desire for meaning and the silence of the universe that refuses to provide it. What we're living through now might be described as a social absurd, the gap between the human need for genuine connection and the world we've built that endlessly offers the appearance of connection while delivering something fundamentally different. In the mountains of Sardinia, Italy, there are small villages where an unusually high proportion of the population lives past 100. Researchers who study these blue zones, regions of the world with extraordinary longevity, have found that diet matters, exercise matters, but the factor that appears most consistently across all of them is something simpler and harder to bottle: the quality of social life. People in these communities don't have more friends. They don't have more followers. They have people who would notice immediately if they were absent. People they have worked beside and argued with and grieved beside and laughed beside over decades. They have what the research now identifies as the essential ingredient: the felt sense that they are genuinely known. Real connection has a texture that is hard to describe, but immediately recognizable when you encounter it. It is the conversation that goes somewhere unexpected, where you end up saying something you didn't plan to say, and the other person doesn't look at their phone or wait for their turn to speak. They just receive it. It is the willingness to be awkward together, to admit uncertainty, to not know the right answer and say so. It is what Brené Brown, the research professor who spent years studying vulnerability, describes as the essential prerequisite for belonging: the willingness to show up as you actually are, not as you wish you were. Not the highlight reel. The whole person. The evidence suggests that what makes conversations feel meaningful isn't topic, it's depth. A study by psychologist Matthias Mell found that people who had more substantive conversations about real experiences, beliefs, and feelings, reported higher levels of well-being than those whose social interactions were mostly small talk. Not because small talk is bad, but because it can't carry the weight of what we actually need from each other. And shared experience, doing things together, not just talking about things, builds a kind of connective tissue that pure conversation can't replicate. Research on what psychologists call behavioral synchrony shows that doing things in coordination with others, moving together, working together, even eating together, creates feelings of closeness and trust that are deeply embodied. We don't just think our way into belonging. We feel it in our bodies. This is why the most impactful communities people describe are usually built around something: a sport, a cause, a shared practice, a creative project. Not around the idea of connection itself, but around something that generates connection as a byproduct of showing up consistently and working towards something together. Real connection, it turns out, is less about finding the right people and more about creating the conditions where depth becomes possible, where masks are optional, where time is allowed, where imperfection is not a problem to manage, but the very thing that makes you recognizable as human. Here is something worth sitting with before we close. We did not arrive here through malice. The forces that built modern disconnection, convenience, individualism, digital technology, urbanization, were each pursuing something genuinely valuable: comfort, freedom, access, efficiency. No one designed a world of loneliness. We discovered it as a side effect of designing a world of frictionless ease. Which means the answer isn't a rejection of modernity. It isn't a romantic return to some village we've never lived in. It is something more nuanced and more demanding: the conscious reconstruction of the conditions for depth inside the world we actually inhabit. That work starts small. It starts with resisting the urge to exit a conversation before it gets uncomfortable, with sitting in the awkward pause instead of checking your phone, with asking someone how they actually are and waiting long enough to find out, with joining something for long enough to let it become a place where you are known. It starts with remembering, in a culture that is optimized so relentlessly for the individual, that you were not designed to make this journey alone. The loneliness of our time is real. Its roots are structural. Its consequences are serious. But it is not permanent, and it is not irreversible. Because the need it represents, the need to be genuinely known, to belong somewhere, to matter to someone in the specific, irreplaceable way that only comes from shared history and honest presence. That need is as old and as persistent as the species itself. It survived every social change that came before this one. And buried beneath all the noise and the convenience and the infinite scroll, it is still there, patient, waiting, insisting. The question isn't whether we still need each other. We do. The question is whether we're willing to do what connection actually costs. The answer to that question is yours to give.